Well, good morning, Christ Chapel. Great to see you here this morning. Hello to those of you at the West Campus or Converge. Glad you've chosen to wake up and come to church. If there was a morning to sleep in, it was this morning. So I applaud all of you. I appreciate you and love that I get to worship with you this morning. Speaking of sleeping, I grew up kind of with a sleeping problem. It's a problem that's pretty common for younger children, more so actually than adults. I was a sleepwalker. I was a sleepwalker, and most people that are sleepwalkers, I would expect, you don't know that you are, unless somebody tells you that you were sleepwalking. And I remember two specific instances sleepwalking when I was younger. The first time I was woken up, I was actually in my parents' bathroom brushing my teeth in the middle of the night. You know, just hygiene's very important to me, even subconsciously. But the second time I remember waking up, being woken up was when it was obviously the middle of the night, and I just remember one hand was on the doorknob and one hand was on the lock to go outside of my house. And my mom woke me up, and I just remember being woken up, and my hands are here trying to get out of the door. Now they say, don't wake up someone who's sleepwalking. But had my mother not woken me up, then who knows where I would have been. Now, I didn't have a terrible childhood. I wasn't trying to escape my home. It's just people do weird things when they're sleepwalking. You can read about it. People have done crazy things when they're sleepwalking. There was one girl, a 15-year-old girl in England, who climbed a 130-foot crane and was asleep at the top of the crane. One guy waded into an alligator-infested pond. Another guy thought he was in a gun battle, a shootout. He woke up only to realize he had shot himself in the leg. You know, they say don't wake up a sleepwalker, but if you don't, they could really, really hurt themselves. Sometimes we are sleepwalking through our lives, just kind of going through the motions, and we need somebody to wake us up. We need a wake-up call. And that's why we're going to begin a new series today through the Old Testament book of Malachi. So if you would go ahead and turn there, please. Malachi chapter 1, it's page 801 if you're opening one of the blue Bibles. It's the last book in the Old Testament. Last book in the Old Testament. So if you know where Matthew is, that begins the New Testament, it's just one book back. So Malachi, and it's actually, you say his name, Malachi. He wasn't an Italian prophet named Malachi. Malachi is how you say his name. And I want to give you some context and some history to what was going on and who Malachi was. We don't actually know a lot about Malachi. We know that his name means my messenger or a messenger of Yahweh, and that's about all that we know about him. He makes this book not about who he is, but about who God is. He is speaking on behalf of God, and this comes at a very timely point in Israel's history. I don't want to trace too far back for you, but Israel had been in the land. They come out of slavery in Egypt. They go to the Promised Land. They conquer the Promised Land, but then they don't follow God, and so they're disciplined by God and exiled out of the land. But then, through God's grace, he uses a king to actually say, "You can go back to the land, Israel." And so Israel gets to come back into the land. And I've actually got a timeline for you here. So Israel is coming back from exile, and temple worship back in Jerusalem is restored. Everything is going really well. Temple worship begins again because they weren't able to do temple worship when they were exiled. And now they're preparing for the Lord's return. The next thing that was going to happen was the Messiah was going to come. So you can imagine the expectations that they have as they prepare for the Messiah to come. They had all these great promises. You can find a lot of them in the book of Zechariah, the prophet Zechariah. They have all these promises. They're coming back, and they have great expectations. They believe, and they've been told by the prophets, this is going to be a great, prosperous nation. I'm going to restore you, Israel. Actually, you will be a light to the nations. Other nations will come here and they will worship at this temple. This city will be filled with so many people. It will be prosperous. So the expectations for the Israelites are way up here, and their reality is way down here. Those things hadn't happened yet. Yeah, Nehemiah had restored the wall about 444 BC, and Malachi comes on the scene because nothing had happened. He comes on about 435, 432 BC. Nothing had happened like they thought it would. There was this huge gap between what and how they expected God to do what he said he was going to do and what was going on. The city wasn't completely restored. People weren't flocking there to worship the Lord from all different nations. They were actually having a lot of financial trouble. The harvests weren't going well, and the Messiah hadn't come. In fact, they were still being ruled by a Persian governor. And they're looking at God and going, oh, I thought you told us everything was going to be great. And it's not. There's that huge gap. And as they live in that gap of what they expected God to do and how they expected him to do it, when they expected him to do it, they grew bitter. They grew bitter towards God, and they began to actually blame God and say, God, this is your fault. You told us that you were going to do this. You told us we would be prosperous. You told us all, and they start becoming belligerent in a sense. They started to break away from their relationship with God. One commentator says this, a spirit of dull depression had settled over the inhabitants of Jerusalem. I apologize. Skepticism and spiritual indifference held the people in their grasp. The flood of skepticism abroad in the land affected both the people and their religious leaders. The religious leaders had lost hope in God. Religion became largely a matter of ritual. Apathy and stinginess toward God prevailed. They grew skeptical. Even their leaders lost hope. They just started to go through the motions, subconsciously saying, okay, we'll do it, but we'll worship you. We'll worship you the way that we know we're supposed to worship you in the temple, but it doesn't mean anything. You're not going to come through. You're not going to do what you said you're going to do. They began to doubt who God was. They began to doubt what God said, and they began to doubt that God even cared about them at all. You know, I think that is a lot like how we can become in our own lives. We have our expectations of what God is going to do for us, how God is going to interact with us, and we believe that God should do some things for us. And when he doesn't come through, we get upset. And we all have those expectations, whether they're realistic or not. I want to introduce you to a dear friend named John Rogers. And John and I have been friends for a while, and we filmed some stuff for him. And if you're in a home group, you're going to see more from him this week in your home group. But he articulates expectations that I believe that we all have, but most of us are unwilling to say, like John says.
My expectations in my old self, and I made a list. My expectations of what, as a believer, as after accepting Christ at 9 and walking in my shoes for decades now, here was my expectations. And I'm kind of making fun of this, but it's the honest truth. This is what I expected in life. I expected good health. I expected financial stability. This is in return for my obedience, for my good deeds. This is what I anticipated in return. I expected from God a great marriage, I wanted the ability to buy what I wanted, when I wanted, and how I wanted. I wanted early retirement. I wanted routine promotions. I wanted kids that excelled in everything. I wanted a mouth that spewed wisdom everywhere I went. I wanted occasional lotto winnings because, of course, I was giving at least 10% to the church. If I was feeling good, it might even be 20%. And because I'm a hunter, I wanted one Boone and Crockett or Pope and Young at least every couple of years. And I'm laughing, but those were my deep-seated expectations. God, if I follow you by going to church and paying homage to the cosmic genie, this is what I want in return.
You know, John's hilarious, but he articulates it so well. We all have those expectations, and we all treat God just as he described him, this cosmic genie of God. I'm worshiping you the way that you want me to. I'm coming to church. I'm in a home group. I'm giving to you. I'm giving part of my reason. Shouldn't you do this in return? Shouldn't you love me this way? Shouldn't you give me all those things I expect? And we have the wrong perspective of God. But that was the perspective that the Israelites had at this time as well. We're doing everything right. Why won't you show up the way that we want you to when we want you to? And that's why Malachi comes with this urgent message, this urgent wake-up call. And it's just as urgent for us today because we have a wrong perspective of God and we need a right perspective of God because our timeline is very similar to the Israelites' timeline. I compared them here. If you look at Israel's timeline on top, temple worship was restored and they are preparing for the Lord to come, and the next thing to come was the Messiah. And they didn't listen to Malachi's message. They hit the snooze button, and guess what? It's 400 years before they get a message from God. 400 years they hit snooze. And us today, Christ has obviously come, and we are preparing for the Lord's return. And the next thing to happen for us is that Christ returns to rapture his own. And in between there, Malachi gave his wake-up call to the Israelites, and we're going to give you a wake-up call today as well. Because we need to wake up to who God is, because we don't know when he's coming back for the rapture. They didn't know when the Messiah was coming back. They didn't know it was going to be 400 years, but I bet you they wish it was less. His return is imminent. This message is urgent. We have to wake up. We cannot hit the snooze button because he's going to come back for his own at any time. And so Malachi's message is urgent for the people of Israel, and it's urgent for us today. So the structure of the book, I've written this on your notes, because Malachi gets really personal with the people. And I want to show you how this is, because the structure of the book highlights the hearts of the Israelites. Remember, I told you the Israelites had grown skeptical about who God was. They were belligerent. They were like teenage children in a sense. Just why? Make me. Always up in his face. And so the structure of the book, God makes a statement, and then the people question that statement. And then God spends the rest of the time, or through Malachi, proving his statement. So God says one thing, they say, prove it. So he ends up proving it. And there's 7 of these pericopes that we'll be studying. That's why it's a 7-week series that we're beginning today. So that's the structure of the book. It's a conversation between God and his belligerent people who need to wake up to who he really is. But it's very, very personal. This is a very personal book. And I know this for 2 reasons. First, why don't you just look at verse 1 with me quickly. The way that this book begins, it says, the oracle of the word of the Lord to Israel by Malachi. I already told you his name means my messenger or Yahweh's messenger. But he says the oracle, and oracle, I don't know, it's been mystified today with all the movies that are out, fantasy movies and things. But oracle is a really unique word. Oracle is actually a noun that comes from the verb that means to carry. And what it was used of was an animal that was used to carry a heavy load, for farming. And so what he's saying here is, this is a heavy message. This is a burden on the Lord. This is something that is heavy on God's heart. Like, I want you to wake up to this. This is my burdensome message. It's burdened my heart, and I can't carry it any longer. I've got to tell you this. I want to engage with you. That's how personal this is to God. But we also know it's personal because the book is written in first person. This is written from God saying, I. Out of the 55 verses in Malachi, 47 of them are written from the first person, I, from God. He's reaching out to us saying, this is who I am. I want to have a personal conversation with you. And it's burdensome. I love how the book starts, this first statement of God, because it shows you how burdened God is for his people. Look at verse 2a, the way he starts off the first statement by God. He says, I have loved you. God says, I have loved you, says the Lord. But you say, the Israelites say, how have you loved us? How have you loved us? No way. I want you to feel the tone of this book, because it is heavy. It is that oracle. It is that burden. And the way that God is saying, I've loved you. It's like a parent who has poured into a child, and the child has gone off and been rebellious and run away. And the parent's going, I've loved you. Why did you run away? Or even probably more accurately, it's a spouse that was unfaithful in the marriage. And I've sat in those counseling appointments, and the faithful spouse is going, why did you do that? I've loved you. I've loved you. Why did you run away? Why did your love grow cold toward me? And God's saying the same thing to his people. I've loved you. Why did you do that? And the Israelites' hearts are so hard that they respond, how have you loved us? How? And God goes through and he tells them 3 ways. Okay, let me prove it to you. Let me prove the extent of my love to you. And he goes through these 3 ways, and these 3 aspects of God's love applied obviously to the Israelites. He was trying to wake them up. And he obviously wants to wake us up as well. So I want to tell you those 3 different ways that God has loved us. And it comes from these first 5 verses so that we might wake up as well. So the first thing that God says to his people is, gosh, have you forgotten my gracious love? Have you forgotten God's gracious love? When you say, God, how have you loved me? He says, I've loved you graciously. Look at verses 2 and 3. I'll pick up at 2a. When he says, I have loved you, but you say, how have you loved us? And he says, is not Esau Jacob's brother? Declares the Lord. Yet I have loved Jacob, but Esau I have hated. I have laid waste his hill country and left his heritage to jackals of the desert. And you're going, that is the most abstract way I've ever heard anybody say, I love you. Husbands, don't try this line, But honey, I've laid waste to the hill country, left the heritage to the jackals. That'll woo her all right, yeah. So to understand what he's saying here about his gracious love, you have to understand the story of Jacob and Esau. Jacob and Esau were twin sons of Isaac and Rebekah. And while Jacob and Esau are in the womb, God says this in Genesis 25. He said, 2 nations are in your womb, Rebekah, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided, meaning 2 nations. The one will be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. And you say, what does this have to do with his grace? What is this gracious love? Well, and also you'd also go, why does he hate this baby? Jacob I've loved, but Esau I've hated. First, you have to understand the idiomatic semblance of this sentence structure and what he means by love and hate. When he's talking about love and hate here, he's not talking about emotions like we talk about love and hate of, I hate that food or I hate that person, I hate what they've done or anything like that. What he's talking about here is it's preference. I'm choosing Jacob. I'm choosing Jacob for a specific purpose. And he's not choosing Esau for a specific purpose. So it's not emotions. This is about God's choice for his purpose. And he says that he chooses Jacob, who was born second. Now, preference was always given in the Old Testament to the older. But his preference in choosing Jacob was to graciously, because preference wasn't given to the younger, choose him for a purpose. And he says the older shall serve the younger. Now, why does he choose Jacob? Why? It has nothing to do with Jacob. They're in the womb. It doesn't have anything to do with him. It has far more to do with who God is. You see, God is gracious. We can't earn his favor. There's nothing you can do to earn his favor. And he's choosing him for his own purpose. That's why he's choosing him. It has far more to do with the gracious nature of God than it has anything to do with who Jacob is. And you say, well, does this mean that God determined their destiny? That one would go to heaven and one would go to hell? No, this isn't about eternal destiny. Because they both had to choose to follow the Lord. Now, Esau chose to not follow the Lord. If you look in Hebrews chapter 12, in that big hall of faith, we see that Esau, it says in verse 16, Esau is unholy. He sold his birthright. He had no reverence, no significance for God. He didn't care about him. And he becomes the father of the Edomites, who we're going to learn about in just a second. So God, when he's saying, how have I loved you? Don't you know? I graciously chose you, Israelites. I graciously chose you for my purpose. So I ask you, have you forgotten God's gracious love, Christ Chapel? Because God has blessed you beyond what you deserve. When you doubt his love, and you doubt his care for you, don't you know he's blessed you beyond what you deserve? And you say, how? Man, just as God was proving his love to the Israelites in verses 2 and 3 by looking back, look back. All you have to do is look back to the cross. That we're all sinners and all have fallen short of the glory of God. And the wages of our sin, what we deserve because of our sin, is death. But Romans 5:8, God demonstrated his love for us in this. He demonstrated his love in that while we were sinners, while we were his enemies, Christ died for us to give us an opportunity to come to God by grace, his gracious love, through faith. And if you've never placed your trust in Jesus Christ and you've always questioned his love for you, would you look back? You're blessed beyond what you deserve because we have an opportunity to be reconciled to our Creator, God. We've all been blessed beyond what we deserve. I mean, for crying out loud, we had a choice to come this morning, whether we wanted to or not. And I could go through and list all the material blessings that we all have, all the emotional blessings that we have, all the friends and the family. I could go on, and all of you could. But if we'll just stop and think about it for a second and not put ourselves in, God, how have you loved me lately? Because that's really what the Israelites were doing. They're putting their finger in God's chest going, what have you done for me lately? And we do that to God all the time, but would you look back and go, oh, that's what you did. Oh, you gave your son for me. Oh, I mean, how many of us would do that? He's blessed you beyond what you deserve. And for those of you that have placed your trust in Jesus Christ, 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 9 says, God who saved us and called us to a holy calling, not because of our works. You see, that's what grace is. It's giving something that you don't deserve. Not because of our works, but because of his own purpose, just like Jacob. In grace, which he gave us in Christ Jesus before the ages began. We've all been blessed beyond what we deserve. And if you don't know Jesus Christ, accept his free gift of salvation. It's the ultimate sign of his love. And then the next question that comes about in verse 4 that God asks the Israelites is, have you forgotten my protective love? This is a really powerful one. Have you forgotten my protective love? You know, he doesn't just love them graciously from the womb, but he protects them as well. Look at verse 4. It says, if Edom says, we're shattered. Now, Edom, those are the descendants of Esau. If Edom says, we are shattered, but we will rebuild the ruins, the Lord of hosts says, they may build, but I will tear down. And they will be called the wicked country and the people with whom the Lord is angry forever. You see, although the Edomites were relatives of the Israelites, they were always enemies of the Israelites. And they were right next to them. If you'll think back, even when Israel's coming out of slavery, out of Egypt, the Edomites won't let them go through their country, which was just south of Israel. We have a map for you. They were coming out. The Edomites would not let them go through any of their country to enter the promised land. They made them go around on the eastern side to get into the promised land. And the Edomites aligned themselves with a lot of Israel's enemies and even came against them many times throughout the Old Testament. Yet God said, I won't let evil spill into your lap. I will not let your enemy prosper. And he holds it. Can you imagine how tense that would be to live next to your enemies all the time? And that's where they lived. And he said, he goes on, he said, remember, he says, even if they try to build a great nation, the Lord will tear it down. I'm not going to let them come against you. It reminds me of Psalm 23 when he says, in the presence of your enemies, I prepare a table for you. You're safe. I got you. I'll provide for you. Even though the enemies are around, I got you. So Christ Chapel, have you forgotten God's protective love in your life? Because God guards you in ways you may never know. He guards you in ways you may never know. And this is, as I've thought about this point, it's overwhelming for me to think about. All the things that could go wrong, that haven't gone wrong. I mean, it's silly. But we have no idea how much God has protected us from. You have no idea, and I have no idea. And I look back, and I could go through Romans 8, and if please go look at that, Romans 8, 31 to 39, if you're studying it this week, and just look at it, because it shows you, man, nothing can separate you from the love of God. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. Nobody can come against you. If God is for you, who can be against you? Nobody. He holds your enemies at bay. He guards you all the time. Scripture even says that he guards us in our sleep. One of the stories when I think about that I love going back to is in 2 Kings chapter 6, when Elisha, the prophet who we studied in our side-by-side series, Elisha is surrounded by the Syrian army. They want to kill him. And one of Elijah's servants said, "What are we going to do, Elisha?" And in 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 16, he says, "Do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And he says, he prays, he says, "God, open the eyes of my servant so that he can see the more that are with us." And God opens the servant's eyes, and the servant looks out, and he sees a mountainside covered with chariots of fire and horses of fire as well. Of all these people that are protecting them, even though the enemies that they can see surround them, there are more for us than against us. I remember, man, God protects us in ways we may never, ever know. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 3 says, "But the Lord is faithful. He will establish you and guard you against the evil one." If you go, what have you done for me lately? Man, you have no idea how his protective love has guarded you, even while you're asleep. And then the last thing he says is, "Have you forgotten my enduring love?" Have you forgotten my enduring love? You see, God doesn't just love you today and leave you tomorrow. God doesn't say, "I love you," so that you'll put all your hope in him so that he can leave you high and dry. His love endures. If you look at verse 5, he tells Israel, "Your own eyes shall see this, and you shall say, 'Great is the Lord beyond the border of Israel.'" You see, this is about the future tense, that I will show you. Your eyes will see how much I love you. Just continue to be faithful. Don't give up on me. Don't grow cold. Don't grow skeptical. Don't grow bitter. Don't grow belligerent. My love endures. You'll see it with your own eyes. Just remain faithful to me, just as faithful as I am to you. You see, sometimes it's hard to remember God's enduring love. But God will remain faithful to you forever. He'll never leave you. He'll never forsake you. And I remember writing this down in my journal. What does forsake mean? Forsake means abandon. He'll never abandon you. He'll never forsake you. He will remain faithful to you forever. His love endures for you forever. And I just keep going back to this, 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9. "No eye has seen, no ear has heard what God has in store for those who love them." You can't even imagine what your eyes will see as you love God. What he has in store for you, you have no clue. His love endures. Your eyes shall see. You see, this is your wake-up call. This is your wake-up call, Christ Chapel. He loves you. So I've got 3 very simple things. First, would you recognize God's love? Recognize his love. The ways that you have been blessed are not just coincidence. He's shouting out to you, "I love you. I love you." By his grace. It's not because you deserve it. It's not because of your merit. He loves you. Recognize his love for his love. It's personal. He's shouting out to you. Some of you need to just recognize that and place your trust in Jesus Christ today. Others of you need to return to God's love. You need to return. You've been running away from the one who's running after you. And I don't know what circumstances in your life have happened, and you say, "Yeah, but Cody, yeah, but Cody, yeah, but Cody." Yeah, but God. Yeah, but God. This is your chance to return to his love for you. But all of us, it's been my prayer throughout this week that we would respond to God's love. Because this kind of love, when you get a comprehensive look of how much God loves you, all the way from the past, from the womb, of how he's been leading you, how he's been loving you, how he's been pursuing you, and how faithful he will be to you all the way into the future and forever into eternity, you have to respond to that. You have to respond. And when he says your eyes will see, what he tells the Israelites is you will see and you will shout, great is the Lord beyond the border of Israel. You have to respond. And we're going to respond. And I've been looking forward to this moment to just respond with you in worship as people who say, we're going to wake up to who God is. A right perspective, not the cosmic genie that we're pointing our finger and poking him in the chest going, what did you do for me lately? But that we would humble ourselves and go, this is how much you've loved us. We'll fall to our knees. We'll praise you. We'll bless you. And we're going to do that through our words and through our worship. And we're going to do it through, as we worship, through giving as well, because giving is a response. And so, men, if you would come forward in all the venues, West Campus and Converge as well, because we're going to spend the next few moments responding to God. So would you pray with me? God, we need a right perspective of you. Forgive me when I have said, how have you loved me lately? Forgive me when I've treated you as unholy, as that genie that should just love me the way that I want to be loved, when I want to be loved, how I wanted to be loved. Lord, I pray that as we take up this offering, Lord, I pray that all these gifts that are given would go to proclaim beyond our borders how great is the Lord. It's in his mighty and powerful name we pray. Amen.